I still remember the way her words cut through me like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Vanessa stood at the top of the grand staircase of our mansion, her expression cold and unyielding as she delivered her final blow. "Thanks for the $3 million inheritance, darling," she said, her lips curling into a smug smile. "I needed it to build my startup. Now get out. My new boyfriend needs space." Her voice was as calm as if she were discussing the weather, but every word landed with the force of a hammer. I stood there, frozen, my suitcase already half-packed, the echoes of her laughter bouncing off the marble walls. For a moment, I wondered if she had always been this cruel, or if I had simply been too blind to see it. This was the woman I had loved, trusted, and supported through everything. I had given her my time, my resources, my heart, and in return, she had stabbed me in the back with a smile on her face. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Words felt useless in the face of her betrayal. So, I nodded, my outward calm masking the storm brewing inside me. "All right, Vanessa," I said quietly, "if that's what you want." She seemed almost disappointed by my lack of reaction, her smug expression faltering for just a moment before she regained her composure. "It's what's best for both of us," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. I finished packing my bags, each movement deliberate and controlled. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. As I zipped up the suitcase and glanced around the room one last time, I felt a strange sense of detachment. This house, this life we had built together, it wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. Vanessa followed me to the front door, her arms crossed and her expression impatient. "Lucas will be here soon," she said, referring to her new boyfriend. "Don't make this any harder than it has to be." I turned to face her, studying her face for any trace of regret or guilt. There was none, just arrogance and entitlement. "Good luck, Vanessa," I said simply, my voice steady. "I hope your startup is everything you dreamed it would be." Her laughter followed me as I stepped out into the crisp evening air, the suitcase rolling behind me. I didn't look back. The drive to the hotel was quiet, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the engine. I replayed the events of the evening in my mind, each word and action etched into my memory. The betrayal was staggering, but there was something else beneath the pain, something that felt a lot like resolve. Vanessa thought she had one. She thought she had outsmarted me, taken everything, and left me with nothing. But what she didn't know was that her perfect plan was built on a foundation of lies, and I had spent months preparing for this moment. As I checked into the small, modest hotel and settled into the room, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. The room was simple, a stark contrast to the opulence of the mansion I had just left, but it felt oddly comforting. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the city lights, and let the storm inside me simmer. Vanessa had underestimated me, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The hotel room was quiet, its walls bare and impersonal. A single bedside lamp cast a soft glow across the modest space, and the muffled hum of city traffic outside was the only sound breaking the silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase untouched in the corner, staring at nothing in particular. This was my reality now, a far cry from the sprawling mansion I had once called home. I should have felt devastated, but what I felt was something heavier, colder. Betrayal is a strange thing. It doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves, each one bringing a fresh sting as you replay every memory, every moment that now feels like a lie. I thought about Vanessa's smile, the way she used to laugh at my jokes, the nights we spent dreaming about the future. Had any of it been real? Or had I just been too blind to see what was right in front of me? I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. The $3 million inheritance. I had received it from my late father, a man who had built an empire through sheer determination and hard work. He had always taught me to value loyalty, to never take trust for granted. And here I was, watching everything he had left me being used as a stepping stone by the woman I once trusted most. I closed my eyes, the memory of Vanessa's smug laugh replaying in my mind. "Thanks for the $3 million inheritance, darling," she had said. "I needed it to build my startup." I had believed in her dreams once. supported her when no one else did. I had sacrificed time, money, and even parts of myself to see her succeed. But now, as I sat in that hotel room, it was clear that my sacrifices had been nothing more than convenient stepping stones for her ambitions. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the complete lack of respect. She had thrown me out like I was nothing, confident in her belief that she had outsmarted me, that I would fade into obscurity while she thrived. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she never cared to notice, was that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I had seen the cracks in her facade long before she made her move. The late nights at the office that didn't add up, the sudden coldness in her tone, the way she dismissed me as if I were an inconvenience. For months, I had been piecing together the puzzle, quietly preparing for the day she would finally reveal her true colors. And now, that day had come. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened it on the small desk in the corner of the room. Logging into my accounts, I reviewed everything I had set in motion months ago. The inheritance, the joint accounts, even the shares I had quietly acquired in her startup, all of it was secure. She had no idea that the foundation of her so-called victory was already crumbling beneath her feet. As I scrolled through the details, a sense of clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Vanessa had built her empire on my trust, my sacrifices, and my inheritance. Now, I was going to show her what it felt like to lose everything. But revenge wasn't the only thing driving me. Sitting there in that room, I realized that I had been holding onto something far more destructive than betrayal. The belief that love could survive without respect and loyalty. Love, I had learned, is not enough. It's not enough to build a life on, not enough to sustain a marriage, not enough to excuse the kind of pain Vanessa had caused. For years, I had clung to the idea of who she was, ignoring the warning signs, convincing myself that things would get better. But the truth was, Vanessa hadn't just betrayed me. She had been betraying me for a long time. I had just refused to see it. Now, as I sat in that small hotel room, the weight of those years pressing down on me, I made a promise to myself. I would take back what was mine. Not just the money or the mansion, but my dignity, my confidence, my life. Vanessa thought she had one. She thought she had taken everything and left me with nothing. But she was about to learn the truth. This wasn't the end of my story. It was a turning point. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The betrayal still stung, but it wasn't the defining moment Vanessa believed it to be. No, the defining moment would come later, when she realized just how badly she had underestimated me. The next morning, I woke up to the faint sounds of the city outside my hotel window. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was. The small, cramped room was a far cry from the luxurious surroundings I'd grown accustomed to. But as the events of the previous day came flooding back, I felt an unexpected sense of purpose. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. I brewed the complimentary coffee from the hotel's mediocre machine and sat at the small desk with my laptop. It was time to act. Months ago, I had started making quiet preparations when Vanessa's behavior first set off alarms in my mind. Her late-night calls, her dismissive attitude, the way she'd downplay my questions about her growing business trips, it all added up. I wasn't a fool, though she thought I was. While she plotted her betrayal, I was setting safeguards in place. Now, it was time to put those plans into motion. The first call I made was to Ethan, my lawyer. Ethan wasn't just a lawyer. He was a strategist, a man who thrived on untangling complicated webs and turning them into his client's advantage. He picked up on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert. "Oliver," he greeted, his tone measured. "I've been expecting your call. Has she made her move?" "She has," I replied, my voice steady. "She kicked me out yesterday. Took the house, gloated about the inheritance. She thinks she's won." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Ethan spoke again, a hint of amusement in his voice. "She doesn't know, does she?" "No," I said. "She has no idea." We spent the next hour going over every detail of the plan we had put in place months earlier. The inheritance Vanessa believed she had complete control over, it was secured in a trust under my name. The joint accounts she thought were hers to spend freely? Frozen. The shares in her startup that she assumed belonged entirely to her? Reallocated to a trust one controlled. Ethan's voice was calm and confident as he walked me through the next steps. Everything is airtight, he assured me. She won't see it coming. But we'll play this carefully. Let her think she's in control for a little longer. The more reckless she becomes, the easier it will be to expose her. After hanging up, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in days, the storm in my chest began to settle. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't at her mercy. The second call I made was to my financial advisor, Daniel. Daniel had been instrumental in setting up the trust and securing my assets. He was meticulous and methodical, exactly the kind of person you wanted in your corner when dealing with someone like Vanessa. Oliver, Daniel said when he answered, I assume this is about the trust? Exactly, I replied. Everything still in place? Every penny, he confirmed. She won't be able to touch a dime. And the shares in her startup, those are still tied to the trust. She may think she owns the company outright, but legally, you have significant control. The thought brought a faint smile to my face. Vanessa's startup, the business she had built on my money and resources, wasn't as untouchable as she believed. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. After the calls, I sat back in the chair, letting the gravity of my preparations sink in. Vanessa had spent months, maybe years, plotting her betrayal, carefully crafting the illusion of control. But she hadn't counted on me being one step ahead. Still, this wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about making her face the consequences of her actions. Vanessa's arrogance had blinded her to the reality of the situation, and I was more than willing to let her walk further into the trap she had set for herself. Over the next few days, I stayed in the hotel, working quietly and methodically. I monitored her moves from a distance, watching as she flaunted her victory on social media, lavish parties, expensive purchases, gloating captions about her newfound freedom. Each post was a reminder of her overconfidence, her belief that she had outsmarted me. But what she didn't realize was that every move she made only tightened the noose. The reckoning would come, not yet, but soon. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For years, Vanessa had dominated our relationship, her manipulations and insults chipping away at my confidence. But now, the tables had turned. She thought she had won, but the game was far from over. I closed my laptop and leaned back, a small smile playing on my lips. Let her celebrate. Let her think she's in control. Because when the time came, she wouldn't just lose the game. She'd realize she never stood a chance. Vanessa had always been a performer. She thrived on attention, relished in the admiration of others, and basked in the glow of validation. It was no surprise, then, that her first move after throwing me out was to flaunt her supposed triumph to the world. Within days of my departure, she hosted a party at the mansion. I saw it on social media, of course. Vanessa made sure to document every moment. Her account was flooded with photos of her surrounded by friends, holding a glass of champagne in one hand and draping the other over her new boyfriend, Lucas. Here's to new beginnings, the caption read, accompanied by a string of emojis. I stared at the screen, shaking my head. It was almost laughable how predictable she was. Vanessa's need to show off her perceived victory blinded her to the reality of her situation. She believed she had everything under control, that I was out of the picture, and that the wealth and lifestyle she had stolen from me were hers to enjoy. But I wasn't angry as I scrolled through the images of her celebration. No, anger had given way to something much sharper, determination. Vanessa thought the mansion was hers. She thought the startup was hers. She thought her position of power was secure. She had no idea that the foundation of her success was already crumbling beneath her feet. The party was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa threw herself into the role of a successful entrepreneur and socialite. She attended galas, hosted networking events, and made grand proclamations about the future of her startup. I followed her every move from a distance, watching as she spent money she didn't realize she no longer had. Lavish vacations, designer clothes, expensive dinners, all financed by accounts that were frozen or assets that were no longer hers. Lucas, her new boyfriend, seemed to be enjoying the ride. He appeared in every photo, always by her side, grinning like the cat that got the cream. I wondered if he knew the truth, if he realized that the lifestyle he was basking in was built on borrowed time. But Lucas wasn't my concern. Vanessa was. Her arrogance made her reckless. She had convinced herself that I was irrelevant, that I was licking my wounds somewhere while she danced on the grave of our marriage. And in her overconfidence, she made mistake after mistake. The first was her decision to expand the startup. She announced a new product line with a press release that boasted about the company's unprecedented growth. Investors were invited to a launch event, complete with expensive catering, custom decorations, and even a live performance by a well-known musician. The event was a spectacle, the kind Vanessa lived for. Photos of her on stage, microphone in hand, flooded my feed the next morning. She looked radiant, confident, invincible. But what Vanessa didn't realize was that her grand launch was funded by a business she didn't fully control. The trust one had established months ago held a significant portion of her company's shares. Legally, she couldn't make major financial decisions without my approval. Not that she had bothered to check. Her second mistake was doubling down on her lavish lifestyle. She replaced her car with an even more expensive model, renovated parts of the mansion, and booked a month-long trip to Europe with Lucas. Each move was a declaration of her supposed independence, a way to show the world, and me, that she didn't need anyone. But each move also brought her closer to the edge of the cliff. From my small hotel room, I watched it all unfold. I forwarded the information to Ethan, who confirmed that her reckless spending and unauthorized business decisions would only strengthen our position when the time came to act. "She's digging her own grave," Ethan said during one of our calls. "And the deeper she digs, the harder it'll be for her to climb out." I nodded, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. Vanessa's overconfidence was her greatest weakness, and she was playing right into my hands. Still, I waited. Timing was everything, and I wanted her to fall as far as possible before I pulled the rug out from under her. The higher she climbed, the harder the fall. One evening, as I scrolled through the latest photos from her European trip, I couldn't help but laugh. There she was, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower with Lucas, champagne in hand, her caption reading, "Living my best life." She thought she had one. She thought she was untouchable. But the truth was, Vanessa's perfect world was already cracking at the seams. And soon, those cracks would become impossible to ignore. Vanessa's downfall began with a single phone call. It was a Friday morning when the cracks in her perfect world started to show. She must have been in the middle of another extravagant shopping spree, swiping her platinum card with the confidence of someone who believed they could never run out of money. When the transaction was declined, she likely chalked it up to a minor glitch. She would have smiled at the cashier, confident as ever, and tried again. But the second decline must have caught her off guard. By the third, I imagined the panic starting to creep in. That's when she called the bank. I wasn't there to hear the conversation, but I could picture it perfectly. Vanessa's calm, confident tone giving way to irritation as she demanded answers, only to be told something she hadn't anticipated. The accounts were frozen. The money she thought was hers to burn had been secured months ago, locked away in the trust one had established. She couldn't touch a single penny without my authorization. The first call from her came to my phone shortly after. I watched it ring, her name flashing across the screen, and for a moment, I considered answering. But I decided against it. Let her sit with the confusion a little longer. Over the next few hours, the calls became more frequent. I let them all go to voicemail, each one more frantic than the last. "Oliver, call me back. There's something wrong with the accounts. This isn't funny, Oliver. I need to talk to you. Pick up the phone. I need to know what's going on." By the end of the day, her messages took on a new tone, desperation. "Please, Oliver. I don't know what's happening. Just please call me back." I didn't. That evening, I called Ethan instead. "She's starting to feel it," I said, unable to hide the satisfaction in my voice. Ethan chuckled. "Good. Let her stew. The financial pressure is just the beginning. Once she realizes how deeply everything is tied to the trust, she'll start making mistakes." He was right. The next day, Vanessa attempted to access the startup's funds to cover her growing expenses. But like her personal accounts, those funds were also tied to the trust. Every transaction required my approval, a detail she had either forgotten or chosen to ignore. Her frustration must have reached its peak when the company's financial advisor informed her that she couldn't authorize payments without my signature. That's when Lucas entered the picture. Vanessa had paraded him around as her perfect new partner, a younger, charming man who basked in the wealth she provided. But as her financial troubles mounted, Lucas's charm began to fade. I heard about their first fight through a mutual acquaintance who had attended one of Vanessa's parties. Lucas had confronted her in front of several guests, demanding to know why her card had been declined at a luxury boutique earlier that day. Vanessa, ever the performer, had tried to laugh it off, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But Lucas wasn't convinced. "You promised me this life," he had reportedly said. "If you can't keep up, what am I even doing here?" It was the beginning of the end for their relationship. Vanessa's panic grew with each passing day. Her once lavish lifestyle was now slipping through her fingers, and she had no idea how to stop it. The breaking point came when she tried to sell shares in the startup to cover her mounting expenses, only to be informed that the shares were part of the trust. She couldn't sell what she didn't fully own. I received another flurry of calls that evening, her voice shrill and panicked in the voicemail she left. "Oliver, you need to call me back. What have you done? I can't access anything. This isn't fair. You can't do this to me. You're ruining everything." I sat in my hotel room, listening to each voicemail with a calm, detached expression. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment Vanessa realized that her empire was built on sand. The next day, I received a call from Ethan. "She's contacted her lawyer," he said. "It sounds like she's trying to challenge the trust." I couldn't help but laugh. "Let her try. She won't get far." Ethan agreed. "Everything is airtight. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." By the end of the week, Vanessa's perfect world had begun to crumble. Her accounts were frozen, her company was tied up in legal red tape, and Lucas, her golden ticket to a new life, was starting to distance himself. It was only a matter of time before the media caught wind of the chaos. As I sat on the balcony of my hotel that evening, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Vanessa had underestimated me, dismissed me as a fool. But now, she was learning the hard way that I wasn't the man she thought I was. Her financial bombshell was only the beginning. Vanessa's world, already teetering on the edge, began to collapse in spectacular fashion. It started quietly enough, a murmur here, a whispered conversation there. But it wasn't long before the whispers turned into headlines. I didn't have to orchestrate much for this phase of my plan. Vanessa's overconfidence and recklessness had done most of the work for me. Ethan, ever the strategist, had sent a carefully crafted report to a few key stakeholders in her company. The document highlighted discrepancies in the startup's financial records, pointing out irregularities that would make even the most forgiving investor think twice. It didn't take long for the media to get their hands on the story. Entrepreneur Vanessa Grant faces allegations of financial mismanagement. The headline splashed across my screen the next morning, accompanied by a photo of Vanessa at one of her lavish parties. She was mid-laugh, champagne flute in hand, looking every bit the confident businesswoman. The irony wasn't lost on me. I scrolled through the article, which detailed how investors were pulling out and raising concerns about her ability to manage the company's finances. The reporter had done their homework, citing specific instances where funds had been allocated to personal expenses rather than business development. By the end of the article, it was clear. Vanessa's reputation as a savvy entrepreneur was in shambles. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee as I imagined her reaction to the news. She had spent so much time cultivating an image of success, of being untouchable. To see it all unravel in the public, I must have been devastating. The fallout was swift. Investors began withdrawing their support, leaving Vanessa scrambling to hold the company together. She called emergency meetings, pleading with her stakeholders to give her more time, but the damage was already done. The trust she had so carefully cultivated was gone, replaced by doubt and suspicion. Lucas, of course, was nowhere to be found. The first sign of his departure came when he quietly unfollowed her on social media. The man who had been glued to her side at every party, every event, was suddenly absent. Mutual acquaintances told me he had moved out of the mansion, leaving behind little more than a terse note. "I didn't sign up for this," it reportedly read. Vanessa's desperation reached new heights. She tried to go on the offensive, contacting journalists to spin the story in her favor. She claimed the allegations were baseless, a coordinated attack by jealous competitors. But her efforts only made things worse. The more she tried to fight back, the more the media scrutinized her actions. They dug into her past, unearthing every questionable decision she had ever made. The picture they painted was not a flattering one. *** Vanessa Grant, a businesswoman's rise and fall. **. Another headline, another nail in the coffin. I followed it all from the comfort of my hotel room. Each new development a reminder of just how far she had fallen. Her social media presence, once a constant stream of curated perfection, grew quieter by the day. The photos of lavish parties and luxury vacations were replaced by vague, apologetic posts that garnered more criticism than sympathy. But the real tipping point came when the mansion, her crown jewel, became a point of contention. The property, purchased through the trust one had established, was never truly hers. And now, with her accounts frozen and her company on the brink of collapse, she could no longer afford to maintain it. The eviction notice came swiftly, delivered to her door one sunny afternoon. She must have been in shock as she read it, realizing that the home she had flaunted as a symbol of her success was slipping through her fingers. I received a message from Ethan later that day. "She's contacted her lawyer again," he said, his tone calm. "They're trying to contest the ownership of the mansion." "Let them try," I replied. "They won't get anywhere." He chuckled. "No, they won't. But it's interesting. Her desperation is showing. She's out of options." By the end of the week, Vanessa's public downfall was complete. The media had turned against her, investors had pulled out, and Lucas had vanished without a trace. The woman who had once stood at the top of her self-made empire was now facing the harsh reality of her choices. That evening, as I sat on the balcony of my hotel, I reflected on everything that had happened. Vanessa's arrogance had been her undoing, her need to dominate and control ultimately leading to her downfall. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my resources, my sense of stability, and used it to build a life that was as hollow as her promises. Now, she was facing the consequences of her actions, and I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Vanessa had always been a performer, but the curtain had finally fallen, and the show was over. The day of the showdown arrived with an air of inevitability. It was a crisp morning when I received a message from Vanessa. It wasn't the frantic, desperate tone she had taken in her previous voicemails. No, this message was calculated, her attempt to regain control. "Oliver, we need to talk. Come to the mansion this evening. Let's sort this out like adults." I read the text twice, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It was a bold move, inviting me back to the very house she had smugly thrown me out of not long ago. I could almost hear her rehearsing her words, planning how she would manipulate the situation to her advantage. She wanted to intimidate me, to make me feel small in the shadow of the life she had stolen. But what Vanessa didn't know was that the mansion she clung to so desperately wasn't hers to claim. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the warm glow of the setting sun casting long shadows over the grand estate. The driveway was empty, no luxury cars, no sign of her entourage of sycophants. It seemed Lucas had truly abandoned her. Vanessa opened the door before I could knock. She was dressed to impress, her makeup meticulously applied, and her jewelry sparkling under the chandelier in the foyer. She was playing the role of the confident hostess, but I could see the cracks in her facade, the tension in her jaw, the slight tremble in her hand as she gestured for me to enter. "Oliver," she greeted, forcing a smile. "I'm glad you came." I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The mansion, once filled with the noise of her endless parties, felt hollow and lifeless. The opulence of the space only emphasized the emptiness within it. What's this about, Vanessa? I asked, my tone calm but firm. She motioned for me to sit in the living room, where a bottle of expensive wine sat on the coffee table, 2 glasses already poured. I remained standing. I thought it was time we cleared the air, she said, settling into one of the plush armchairs. Things have gotten out of hand, and I think we both want the same thing, to move forward. I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. Move forward? After everything you've done? She sighed dramatically, as if she were the victim in this scenario. Look, I know things didn't end well between us, but we're both adults, and there's no reason we can't come to an agreement. I'm willing to. Cut the act, Vanessa, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You didn't invite me here to make amends. You're desperate, and this is your last-ditch effort to regain control. So let's skip the pretense and get to the point. Her composure faltered, and for a moment, I saw the anger flash in her eyes. She quickly masked it with another forced smile. Fine, she said, leaning forward. You want the truth? I need your help. The company is falling apart, the mansion is at risk, and the media won't stop hounding me. If you could just, she trailed off, her voice softening as she tried to summon a shred of sincerity. Help me stabilize things. We could both come out of this better off. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, humorless sound that echoed through the room. Vanessa, you still don't get it, do you? I said, shaking my head. You're not in control anymore. The mansion you're so desperate to save? It's not yours. It never was. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I reached into my bag and pulled out the trust documents, placing them on the table between us. The mansion was purchased through the trust once set up. Legally, it belongs to me. And as of this morning, I've started the process of reclaiming it. The color drained from her face as she scanned the papers, her hands trembling. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I already have, I replied, my tone cold. You spent months building your empire on my inheritance, my trust, and my support. You thought you could take everything and leave me with nothing. But you were wrong. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and fear. You're doing this out of spite, she spat. You're trying to ruin me. No, Vanessa, I said, standing and looking down at her. You ruined yourself. I'm just taking back what was mine. I turned and walked toward the door, her protests ringing out behind me. You can't just leave me like this. You owe me. I stopped in the doorway, glancing back at her one last time. I don't owe you anything, I said. Goodbye, Vanessa. The slam of the door echoed through the mansion as I stepped out into the cool night air. I felt no guilt, no regret, only the satisfaction of knowing that the life she had stolen was slipping through her fingers. Vanessa had played her games, but the mansion showdown marked the end of her reign. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. Vanessa's fall from grace wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. It was a symphony of consequences, each one striking a chord of poetic justice. The mansion was just the beginning. With nowhere to hide and no resources left to exploit, her carefully constructed facade began to crumble faster than even I had anticipated. The first blow came when the lawsuits started piling up. Investors who had once fawned over her charisma and visionary leadership were now demanding answers and their money. Ethan had predicted this would happen, and he was right. The financial discrepancies in her startup weren't just embarrassing. They were borderline criminal. Misallocated funds, falsified expense reports, and lavish personal expenditures disguised as business development left her with a mountain of legal troubles. I heard about the first lawsuit through Ethan, who called me one afternoon with a note of amusement in his voice. Vanessa's being sued by 2 of her largest investors, he said, and they're not holding back. They're going after her personally, not just the company. She must be panicking, I replied, picturing her sitting in a lawyer's office, frantically trying to explain away the mess she'd created. Panic doesn't even begin to cover it, Ethan said. She's drowning, Oliver. And the more she fights, the worse it's going to get. The lawsuits weren't the only problem she faced. The media, having already exposed her financial mismanagement, began digging deeper into her past. Old business associates came forward with stories of betrayal and deceit, painting a picture of a woman who had built her career on manipulation and shortcuts. Vanessa Grant. From rising star to corporate pariah, that headline made the rounds across every major outlet, accompanied by an unflattering photo of her leaving a courthouse, looking frazzled and unkempt. The woman who once thrived on attention was now the subject of public scorn, her name synonymous with greed and failure. But the most significant blow came from within her own company. The employee she had once treated as expendable began to turn against her, leaking internal emails and documents that further exposed her misconduct. The board of directors, desperate to salvage what was left of the startup, voted to remove her as CEO. When the news broke, I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. Vanessa had always believed she was invincible, untouchable. But now, she was learning the hard way that actions have consequences. The fallout wasn't limited to her professional life. Her personal life was in shambles, too. Lucas, the man she had chosen over me, had vanished without a trace. Friends who once clamored for her attention now avoided her calls. Even her family, who had always turned a blind eye to her flaws, distanced themselves to avoid being dragged into the chaos. Vanessa was truly alone. I wasn't entirely surprised when she tried to reach out to me again. The first message was a carefully worded email, dripping with forced humility. "Oliver, I know I've made mistakes. I was hoping we could talk. Please, for old time's sake, can we meet?" I deleted it without replying. The second attempt came a few days later, a phone call that I let go to voicemail. Her voice was shaky, a far cry from the confident woman who had once laughed in my face as she threw me out of the mansion. "Oliver, I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. I need your help. Please, just call me back." I didn't. Ethan advised me to stay out of it entirely, and I agreed. Vanessa had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences of those choices. There was nothing more to say. Still, I couldn't deny the bittersweet nature of her downfall. This was a woman I had once loved, someone I had built a life with. But the Vanessa I had fallen for no longer existed, if she ever truly had. One final blow came when the courts ruled against her in the lawsuits. She was ordered to repay millions to her investors, money she didn't have. Her accounts were empty, her assets seized, and her company dissolved. The mansion was gone, the startup was gone, and her reputation was in tatters. Vanessa Grant, the self-proclaimed powerhouse entrepreneur, had been reduced to nothing. That evening, as I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, overlooking the city that had once felt like a prison, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Vanessa's reckoning wasn't just about justice. It was a turning point for me as well. For years, I had allowed her to control the narrative, to dictate the terms of our relationship and my life. But now, I was free. Free from her manipulation, her cruelty, and her arrogance. The reckoning wasn't just hers, it was mine too. As the city lights twinkled below, I raised a glass to the future. A future that no longer included Vanessa, but one that was filled with possibility. The days following Vanessa's downfall felt surreal, like a storm had finally passed, leaving a calm, open sky. For years, I had been caught in her web, tangled in the lies, manipulations, and emotional warfare that had defined our relationship. But now, for the first time, I was free to rebuild my life on my terms. I started small. The penthouse, which had once felt like an escape from the chaos of our marriage, began to feel like home. I spent my mornings standing on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the city. The quiet moments of solitude reminded me of the man I had been before Vanessa came into my life, a man who valued simplicity, honesty, and peace. But this new chapter wasn't just about reclaiming who I was. It was about moving forward. The first step was diving back into work. For years, I had put my career on the back burner, funneling time, money, and energy into Vanessa's startup. Now, with her influence no longer weighing me down, I could focus on projects that truly mattered to me. I partnered with Ethan, who introduced me to a few like-minded investors. Together, we launched a venture capital firm aimed at supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs with a vision for sustainability and social impact. It wasn't just about making money. It was about building something meaningful, something that reflected my values. The work was invigorating. Every deal, every meeting, every handshake felt like a step toward the future I wanted to create. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I was doing. But the rebuilding process wasn't limited to my professional life. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage to Vanessa. They welcomed me back with open arms, their support a reminder that I hadn't lost everything. One evening, I hosted a dinner party at the Penthouse. It was a small gathering, just a handful of close friends and colleagues. The laughter, the conversations, the clinking of glasses, it all felt so natural, so genuine. "You look happy," one of my oldest friends said as we stood on the balcony later that night, the city lights twinkling below. "I am," I replied, and I meant it. There were other changes, too. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. It started as a way to pass the time, but it quickly became a passion. My studio in the Penthouse soon filled with canvases, landscapes, abstract pieces, and even a few portraits. Each brushstroke felt like a form of therapy, a way to process everything I had been through. The betrayal, the anger, the pain. It all found its way onto the canvas, transformed into something beautiful. As the months went by, I began to feel like a different person, or maybe just a better version of myself. The weight of the past no longer hung over me. Vanessa's name was barely a whisper in my thoughts, a ghost from a life I no longer lived. But the real turning point came when I received an email from one of the small businesses our firm had invested in. "Thank you for believing in us," it read. "Your support has changed everything for us. We're finally able to expand and hire more staff. We couldn't have done this without you." Reading those words brought a lump to my throat. For years, I had poured my resources into Vanessa's dreams, only to be met with betrayal. But now, I was helping people who truly appreciated it. People who were using that support to create something meaningful. It was a reminder that even the darkest chapters of our lives can lead to brighter days. One afternoon, I stood on the balcony, looking out over the city, and thought about how far I had come. The man I was when Vanessa threw me out of the mansion felt like a distant memory. I had been lost, broken, and unsure of who I was. But now, I was stronger. Vanessa's betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also been a catalyst, a wake-up call that forced me to reevaluate everything. And in the process, I had discovered a version of myself I didn't even know existed. The man standing on that balcony wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shades of gold and amber, I raised a glass to the future. This was my life now, full of purpose, passion, and peace. And I wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, take that away from me again. The knock on my door came on a rainy evening, the kind where the city seemed to slow down under the weight of the storm. I wasn't expecting anyone, which made the intrusion all the more surprising. When I opened the door, there she was, Vanessa. She was drenched, her once meticulous appearance now disheveled. Her makeup had smudged from the rain, and her hair clung to her face in damp strands. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. The woman standing before me wasn't the confident, calculating Vanessa who had once ruled over my life. She looked broken. "Oliver," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." I stood in the doorway, letting her words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to remind her of the humiliation she had inflicted on me. But another part of me, a quieter, calmer part, wanted to hear what she had to say. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I asked, my tone even. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked down at her hands, which were clutching the strap of her rain-soaked handbag. I don't know where else to go," she admitted. "I've lost everything, Oliver. The mansion, the company, the money. It's all gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity. But it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of her smug smile, her cold words as she threw me out of the house we had once shared. "That's not my problem," I said, stepping back slightly. Her eyes shot up, desperation etched into her face. "Please," she whispered. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I don't have anyone else. Lucas left me, My friends won't return my calls, and my family, they don't want anything to do with me. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. I've hit rock bottom, Oliver. And I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. I was selfish, arrogant, and blind. I didn't see what I had until it was gone. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. And now you want me to save you? She flinched at the bluntness of my words, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. I don't know what else to do. I sighed, stepping aside to let her into the penthouse. She hesitated for a moment before walking in, her shoes leaving wet marks on the pristine floor. I didn't offer her a seat or a drink. Instead, I stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Do you remember the last thing you said to me before you threw me out of the mansion? I asked, my voice calm. She looked up at me, her brow furrowing. I don't. Thanks for the $3 million inheritance, I quoted, turning to face her. Now get out. My new boyfriend needs space. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was awful, she admitted. I don't know why I said those things. I thought I was untouchable, that I didn't need anyone. But I was wrong. Yes, you were, I said, my voice firm. She sobbed openly now, her body shaking with the weight of her emotions. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said between gasps. But I'm begging you, Oliver. Please help me. I stared at her, the woman who had once taken so much from me, now standing in my living room, drenched and defeated. For a moment, I considered her plea. It would have been easy to give in, to let her back into my life out of some misplaced sense of compassion. But I had learned my lesson. You made your choice, Vanessa, I said, my tone cold but not cruel. You built your life on greed and deceit, and now you're paying the price. I'm not going to save you. Her sobs grew quieter, and she looked up at me with a mixture of despair and acceptance. I understand, she said softly. I walked to the door and opened it, motioning for her to leave. She hesitated, looking at me one last time. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know, I replied, but that doesn't change anything. She stepped out into the rain, her head bowed, and I closed the door behind her. For a moment, I stood there, staring at the closed door, the echoes of her voice still lingering in the air. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only peace. Vanessa's return had been a test, a final opportunity to see how far I had come. And as I walked back to the balcony, watching the city lights glow through the rain, I realized that I had truly moved on. This was my life now, a life built on strength, dignity, and wisdom. And as Vanessa disappeared into the storm, I knew I was ready to embrace the future, free from the shadows of the past.